Fellow Africans, brothers and sisters, imagine a continent that has been told for centuries to stay silent. A land reminded again and again that its future will be written not in Africa, but in foreign capitals. This is the weight Africa has carried for generations. But one day, under the blazing Sahel sun, a young leader stood up and shattered that silence. He declared words that would echo across the continent. Burkina Faso will not bow. Africa will no longer bow. In that moment, something changed. It was not just a speech, it was a spark. From the heart of Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré's voice cut through the noise of history. Radios in dusty villages crackled with his words. Hashtags exploded on the phones of Africa's restless youth, and elders in marketplaces repeated his sentence as if it was scripture. It was defiance turned into fire, and fire turned into movement. But what provoked this boldness? Rumors had spread, whispers that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had warned African leaders not to overstep, not to dream beyond the limits set for them. For decades, such warnings might have been swallowed in silence, but not this time. Traoré, barely in his mid-30s, stepped before the cameras, not to calm foreign allies, not to comfort investors. Instead, he looked straight into the eyes of the world and thundered, "Africa will not bow." These were not careful words of diplomacy. They were the battle cry of a generation thrown at the feet of empires. And the reaction was immediate. In Ouagadougou, women selling vegetables paused and whispered his words like a prayer. Students rushed into the streets, waving banners of sovereignty and new Africa. Community radios compared the moment to the fiery days of Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary whose voice once carried the same fire before being silenced. But this time felt different. Mali responded with solidarity. Guinea praised the defiance. Across the Sahel, a unity unseen in decades began to form. Within hours, hashtags like Africa will not bow and Sahel rising surged across social media. Videos of the speech spread like wildfire, subtitled in Swahili, Arabic, and Zulu. And yet, while African streets erupted in pride, the Western press dismissed it. Commentators in Washington called it reckless. French broadcasters, bitter about losing influence in the Sahel, warned of dangerous populism. And Netanyahu, silent. Neither denial nor confirmation. But in geopolitics, silence often speaks louder than words. Inside Burkina Faso, momentum was growing. Parliamentarians began discussing what they called the Sovereignty Act, a draft law promising to restrict foreign military bases, to renegotiate mining contracts, to ensure that Burkina Faso's gold would finally benefit its own people. The streets buzzed with energy. Street vendors sold T-shirts with Traoré's face printed beside Sankara's, captioned, "The struggle continues." For the first time in decades, farmers, miners, teachers felt politics belonged to them. But one question lingered, like thunderclouds before a storm. Was this truly the beginning of Africa's second liberation, or the start of a reckless gamble against powers far greater than Burkina Faso itself? Stay with us, because what happened next would shake the entire region and force the world to choose between Africa's dignity and its dependence.
After that fiery declaration, Ouagadougou was no longer just a capital. It became the battlefield of ideas. Streets once filled with routine trade now pulsed with chants of sovereignty. The parliament, usually a place of cautious speeches, turned into a furnace of arguments. The Sovereignty Act was no longer just talk, it was becoming law. Its proposals were bold, unthinkable only months before. Restrict foreign military presence, renegotiate gold contracts with French and Canadian companies, ensure that Burkina Faso's resources served its people first. Students held vigils outside Parliament with placards reading, "Our resources, our future." Women's groups joined, declaring that sovereignty meant schools for their children and clinics for their families. And the movement spread. Mali studied the law. Guinea's leader declared Africa must never negotiate on its knees again. Even Niger, battered by sanctions, hinted at following. But while the Sahel rose in unity, Western capitals grew uneasy. Think tanks in Washington warned of Burkina Faso sliding into the arms of Russia and China. Paris mourned the collapse of French influence. Tel Aviv stayed silent, fueling speculation. Then came the turning point. A secret meeting between officials of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger birthed the West African Sovereignty Pact. This was no symbolic alliance. Its clauses promised a mutual defense agreement, joint infrastructure projects, and a shared investment fund to break free from dependence on the IMF and World Bank. For many Africans, this was not just politics, it was prophecy fulfilled. Across the continent, commentators called it the Sankara moment of our generation. On social media, youth in Lagos, Dakar, and Johannesburg celebrated as if they had won independence all over again. But shadows followed. Western aid agencies scaled back programs, the EU froze talks, ECOWAS threatened sanctions, and critics warned that the rising tide of nationalism could also mask authoritarianism. And yet, in Ouagadougou's Revolution Square, none of this mattered. Families gathered under a massive banner that read, "Sovereignty or nothing." Children chanted in unison, "Africa will not bow." For once, hardship felt like sacrifice with purpose. Informal markets adapted. Farmers proudly embraced the slogan, "Consume local, build Africa." The sense of dignity was greater than the fear of sanctions. But here lies the suspense. Will history record this as the rebirth of Africa's sovereignty? A new chapter of self-reliance, dignity, and unity? Or will it be remembered as another dream betrayed, crushed by sanctions, destabilization, and the same forces that once silenced leaders like Patrice Lumumba and Thomas Sankara? The choice, brothers and sisters, is still unfolding. Ibrahim Traoré has thrown the gauntlet. Burkina Faso has spoken. The Sahel is rising. And the question now is simple. Who will follow, and who will try to stop them? This is only the beginning.